Lowell Thomas George was an American songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and producer, who was the primary guitarist, vocalist, and songwriter for the rock band Little Feat. Biography: Lowell George was born in Hollywood, California, the son of Willard H. George, a furrier who raised chinchillas and supplied furs to the movie studios. George's first instrument was the harmonica. At the age of 6 he appeared on Ted Mack's original Amateur Hour performing a duet with his older brother, Hampton. As a student at Hollywood High School, he took up the flute in the school marching band and orchestra. He had already started to play Hampton's acoustic guitar at age 11, progressed to the electric guitar by his high school years, and later learned to play the saxophone, shakuhachi and sitar. During this period, George viewed the teen idol-oriented rock and roll of the era in a contemptuous light, instead favoring West Coast jazz and soul jazz of Leigh McCann and Mose Allison. Following graduation in 1963, he briefly worked at a gas station to support himself while studying art and art history at Los Angeles Valley College for 2 years. Musical career: initially funded by the sale of his grandfather's stock, George's first band The Factory formed in 1965 and released at least one single on the Uni label, Smile, Let Your Life Begin. Members included future Little Feat drummer Richie Hayward, Martin Kibbe, who would later co-write several Little Feat songs with George, and Warren Klein on guitar. Frank Zappa produced 2 tracks for the band, but they weren't released until 1993 on the album Lightning Rod Man, billed as Lowell George and The Factory. The band made an appearance on the 1960s sitcom F Troop as the Bedbugs. They were also featured in an episode of Gomer Pyle, USMC, Lost, The Colonel's Daughter. They appeared in the scene inside the A Go-Go Club, with their music heard playing loudly. They received credits at the end of the episode as The Factory Lowell Warren Martin Rich, courtesy of Universal Records. Following the disbanding of The Factory, George briefly joined the Standalls. In November 1968, George joined Zappa's Mothers of Invention as rhythm guitarist and nominal lead vocalist. He can be heard on both Weasels Ripped My Flesh and the first disc of You Can't Do That on Stage Anymore, Volume 5. During this period, he would absorb Zappa's autocratic leadership style and avant-garde influence conceptual procedural-oriented compositional methods. He earned his first production credit on Permanent Damage, an album recorded by groupie group the GTOs. George later asserted that he performed no real function in the band, and left the group in May 1969 under nebulous circumstances. GTO's member Pamela Desbars has claimed that George was fired by the abstemious Zappa for smoking marijuana, while he claimed at a 1975 Little Feat concert that he was fired because he wrote a song, Willin' About Dope. On the contrary, biographer Mark Brand asserts that Zappa liked the song, but thought there was no place for it in the Mother set. George himself alternatively claimed that it was decided that I should leave and form a band by mutual agreement. George's electric slide guitar skills are also featured on Bonnie Raitt's Taking My Time album on tracks, I Feel the Same, and Guilty. Little Feat. After leaving the Mothers of Invention, George invited fellow musicians to form a new band, which they named Little Feat. George usually played lead guitar and focused on slide guitar. Y could have played the slide on the debut Little Feat album after George badly injured his hand while working on a powered model airplane, although George re-recorded some of his material. Mark Brand wrote that George's use of compression defined his sound and gave him the means to play his extended melodic lines. When not working with Little Feat, George lent his talents as a session player. George played guitar on John Cale's 1973 album Paris 1919, Harry Nilsson's Son of Schmielsen album and The Meters' Just Kissed My Baby in 1974, and on John Sebastian's Tarzana Kid. In 1976 he played on Jackson Browne's The Pretender. Also with The Meters, George's slide work features prominently on Robert Palmer's first solo studio album, Sneakin' Sally Through the Alley, recorded in New Orleans in 1974. Palmer's follow-up record, 1975's Pressure Drop, was produced by Lowell, and Little Feat were the core band on the sessions. Palmer kept the producer's credit because of a dispute between his label, Island, and Warner's. later CDS list Steve Smith as producer. Upon the record's release, the band and Palmer embarked on the tour that resulted in the recordings that made Feet famous. While, however great the Pressure Drop LP is, Palmer's career languished. By the spring of 1976, Little Feat were touring North America opening for the WHO. In the 1970s, Little Feat released a stream of studio albums: Little Feat, Sailin' Shoes, Dixie Chicken, Feet Don't Fail Me Now, The Last Record Album, and Time Loves a Hero. The group's 1978 live album Waiting for Columbus became their best-selling album. In an interview with Bill Flanagan conducted 11 days before his death, George stated that he was keen to reform Little Feat without Bill Payne and Paul Barrere in order to reassert his full control over the group. Due to tensions within the group, especially between George and Payne and, to a lesser extent, Barrere, regarding musical direction and leadership, Payne and Barrere left the group in 1979. George was also a producer, and produced the Grateful Dead's 1978 album Shakedown Street, as well as Little Feat's records, Valerie Cutter's 1977 release Just a Stone's Throw Away, and his own 1979 solo album Thanks, I'll Eat It Here. Death. On June 15, 1979, George began a tour in support of his solo album. On June 29, 1979, the morning after an appearance at Washington, D.C.'s Listener Auditorium where the bulk of Waiting for Columbus had been recorded, George collapsed and died in his Arlington, Virginia, hotel room at the Twin Bridges Marriott. A post-mortem report later stated that heart failure was the cause of death. George's body was cremated in Washington, D.C., on August 2. His ashes were flown back to Los Angeles, where they were scattered from his fishing boat into the Pacific Ocean. Posthumous tributes and cover songs. A benefit concert for George's family was held shortly after his death at the Forum in Los Angeles on August 4, 1979, featuring Little Feat, Jackson Browne, Linda Ronstadt, Emila Harris, Bonnie Raitt, Nicolette Larson and others. The song Ride Like the Wind on the 1979 self-titled album by Christopher Cross was dedicated to Lowell George. Jackson Browne memorialized George in his 1980 Song of Missing Persons, on the Holdout album released in June 1980. The song was dedicated to George's daughter, Inara George, who is in the musical duo The Bird and the Bee. Browne famously described George as the Orson Welles of rock. In 1983, the British poet Sean O'Brien included a poem for Lowell George in his collection, The Indoor Park. In 1988, American rock band Van Halen covered A Apolitical Blues as the closing track for their album OU812. In 1997, the CD Rock 'N' Roll Doctor a tribute to Lowell George was released featuring various artists performing versions of George's songs, including Jackson Browne, J.D. Souther, Bonnie Raitt, Eddie Money, Randy Newman, KSUQ Waiter, and Inara George. French recording artist Jan Schubert included tribute song Lowell George in his 1980s eponymous album. Chris and Rich Robinson covered Roll 'Em Easy on their album Brothers of a Feather. American jam band Phish played all the songs from Little Feat's double LP Waiting for Columbus during their annual and traditional Halloween musical costume on October 31, 2010 in Atlantic City, New Jersey. References. External links: Little Feat website, Lowell George at the Internet Movie Database, Lowell George at Find a Grave, Lowell George interview, Guitar Player Magazine 1976.